There was a moment when this company had less than 2 weeks of cash left. No backup plan, no safety net. Today, it doesn't just build cars. It shapes the future you are expected to live in. How does something so close to death end up redefining an entire century? And more importantly, what does it take from the people who build it and the people who believe in it? Because this is not a story about technology. It's a story about obsession. And what obsession does when it's allowed to scale. Every empire begins with a promise, but the dangerous ones begin with a refusal to accept limits, a refusal to wait, a refusal to listen when everyone else says, "This is impossible." This is the story of an empire that never sleeps, because the mind behind it never learned how. Long before factories, rockets, or electric highways, there was a child who learned something early, that being different doesn't make you powerful, it makes you alone. Books replaced people, ideas replaced comfort, and silence became a place where imagination could grow unchecked. This wasn't curiosity for fun. This was curiosity as survival, not to fit into the world, but to escape it. Most people grow out of their obsessions. They learn restraint, they learn compromise. But some people do the opposite. They feed it. They start believing that the world is slow, not because it's careful, but because it's weak. That progress isn't blocked by physics. It's blocked by hesitation. And once you accept that idea, waiting becomes unbearable. The first real risk wasn't electric cars. It was belief. Belief that industries built over 100 years could be overturned by speed, arrogance, and code. No legacy advantage, no trust, no permission. Just a conviction so strong that failure stopped being a warning and became fuel. But belief alone doesn't build empires. It only attracts enemies. The system pushed back immediately. Experts laughed. Manufacturers dismissed it. Investors whispered the same word, unrealistic. And that word did something dangerous. It didn't slow things down. It sharpened them. Because when you build against disbelief, every small win feels like destiny. And destiny is addictive. Money burned faster than confidence grew. Deadlines slipped. Pressure stacked. Behind the vision, something darker formed. A culture where urgency replaced empathy and speed replaced sleep. The question was no longer, will this work? It became, how much pain is acceptable before success justifies it? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most revolutionary ideas don't fail because they are wrong. They fail because the humans behind them break first. And this story came terrifyingly close to ending right here. Not with applause, but with silence. What followed wasn't innovation, it was survival. A gamble so extreme that it rewired the company forever. And the price of that gamble would be paid by everyone who came after. Because once you build something that refuses to sleep, it never lets you rest again. By the time the world started noticing Tesla, the company was already bleeding. Factories were unfinished, promises were expensive, and the math no longer worked. Every new prototype looked like progress. Every balance sheet looked like a warning. Inside the company, the question changed again. Not can we build it, but how long before everything stops? Pressure does something strange to visionaries. It removes softness, it removes patience, and it replaces conversation with command. Decisions stopped being collaborative, they became urgent. Because when time runs out, democracy feels inefficient. And this is where the empire began to change shape, from an idea people believed in to a force people had to keep up with. The next move wasn't smart, it was desperate. Everything, reputation, capital, credibility, was pushed onto a single outcome, one product, one launch, one chance to prove the world wrong. Failure here wouldn't mean delay, it would mean disappearance. Against probability, the impossible began to hold. Orders came in, momentum returned. Hope re-entered the room, but something subtle changed. Success didn't soften the obsession, it validated it. The lesson wasn't, be careful. The lesson became, pressure works. And that idea would echo through everything that followed. As Tesla survived, others felt threatened. Legacy industries didn't panic loudly. They smiled politely. Then they lobbied. They delayed. They whispered doubts into public trust. But opposition only sharpened the narrative. Because nothing builds loyalty like a shared enemy. Tesla wasn't just selling vehicles anymore. It was selling defiance. Inside the company, the pace accelerated. Deadlines stopped being goals. They became expectations. Sleep became optional. Burnout became normal. And questioning urgency started to look like betrayal. The belief was simple. If the future matters this much, then discomfort is a small price to pay. But discomfort has a way of compounding. Criticism grew louder. Missed timelines resurfaced. Public confidence wavered. And suddenly the same boldness that saved Tesla was accused of recklessness. This wasn't collapse, but it was the first visible crack. A reminder that belief doesn't protect you from consequences. Instead of slowing down, Tesla recalibrated. Production scaled, messaging sharpened. The mission expanded beyond cars, energy, infrastructure, a reimagined future. The company stopped positioning itself as a manufacturer. It began presenting itself as destiny. And this is where the real shift happened. Because when a company convinces the world that it represents the future, criticism starts to sound like resistance, doubt starts to sound like fear, and power quietly changes hands. What came next wasn't growth, it was dominance. And dominance always comes with a cost. Power doesn't arrive with noise, it arrives with normalization. At first, Tesla felt optional, then it felt inevitable. Charging stations appeared like landmarks of the future. Electric became responsible. Gasoline began to feel outdated, almost careless. And slowly, without force, preference turned into pressure. People didn't just buy Tesla, they aligned with it. Owning one stopped being a decision. It became a statement about intelligence, about values, about being on the right side of history. And when a brand reaches that point, logic takes a step back. Because identity is stronger than reason. But every belief system casts a shadow. Perfection demanded sacrifice. Speed demanded silence. Criticism was reframed as misunderstanding. Concern was dismissed as fear. And questions that slowed momentum quietly disappeared from the conversation. Because when progress becomes sacred, doubt becomes heresy. Inside the empire, the same rule applied everywhere. Move faster, ship sooner, fix later. Mistakes weren't denied. They were reframed as learning, as iteration, as the unavoidable cost of changing the world. But the faster you move, the harder it becomes to see who gets left behind. Here's the most unsettling part. No one was forced to follow. People volunteered, defended, excused. Because Tesla didn't demand loyalty, it inspired it. And inspired loyalty is the most powerful kind. It polices itself. Cracks widened, reports surfaced, voices emerged, stories contradicted the myth. But by then, the empire was too large to be questioned easily. Criticism bounced off belief, facts dissolved into opinion, and the narrative held. Tesla was no longer just a company. It shaped policy, it shifted markets, It influenced how governments talked about the future, and when a corporation begins to guide imagination itself, its reach extends far beyond profit, because whoever defines the future controls the present. So the question quietly changed again, not, "Is this impressive?" but, "What happens when this kind of power never learns to slow down?" Because growth without reflection doesn't stop, it escalates. And that escalation was about to meet its limit. New challengers, new scrutiny, a future that refused to cooperate, because even empires that never sleep eventually face a morning they can't control. What comes next isn't expansion, it's reckoning. Every empire believes the future belongs to it, until the future answers back. Competition sharpened, regulation grew teeth, public patience thinned. The world Tesla helped accelerate began demanding accountability at the same speed, because influence invites attention, and attention invites judgment. At scale, nothing is small. A delayed update becomes a headline. A bold statement becomes a policy debate. A single decision ripples through markets, streets, and homes. The margin for error shrinks as the surface area of impact expands. And suddenly, speed, the very thing that built the empire, starts to feel dangerous. Visionaries see what others can't, but they also risk seeing only what they want. Confidence turns into certainty. Certainty turns into dismissal. And the line between conviction and blindness gets thinner with every win. The question becomes uncomfortable. Who corrects a system that believes it already knows the answer? Tesla changed expectations. It proved that impossible timelines could be challenged, that legacy industries could be disrupted. That belief, when scaled, can move entire civilizations. But legacy is not what you build. It's what remains after the momentum slows, and that judgment is never immediate. Behind every breakthrough, there are human limits quietly tested. Sleep traded for speed, patience traded for progress, doubt traded for belief. The world applauds results. It rarely audits the process, but history does. Eventually, every empire starts as an idea, an answer to a problem others accepted. But ideas don't stay small. They grow, they demand. They reshape the people who carry them. And the most powerful ideas eventually stop asking for permission. So here's the real question. Not whether Tesla succeeded, not whether it failed, but whether a future built at this speed still leaves room for reflection. Because progress without pause doesn't just move forward, it runs. Tesla doesn't just build machines, it builds expectations about how fast we should move, what we should accept, and how much urgency we should live with. And once urgency becomes normal, rest starts to feel like resistance. The empire never sleeps. Because sleep requires trust in tomorrow, and trust is hard when you believe only speed keeps you ahead. So as the world races forward, guided by ideas that refuse to slow, ask yourself this. If the next empire is already shaping your future, who gets to decide when it's time to stop?